The OG Xbox was an absolute powerhouse back in the 6th generation, offering what would be the best graphical experience for multi-platform games during its time, and many of those games supporting 480p and some even supporting 720p. For me personally, back in the day, it was my go-to system for multi-platform games, as well as some really good first-party exclusives from Microsoft. The console's still a lot of fun to play to this day, and is worth seeking out if you don't already own one. In general, the console can be had for what is a very reasonable price these days. The console supports component video out, which is how you're going to want to experience the games in their clearest visual fidelity. Just be aware that you're going to want the official component cables or a third-party set made by a reputable company, as the cheap ones on Amazon are not shielded and will introduce a ton of noise into the picture. Well, anyway, after searching eBay for those cables, it dawned on me how expensive they've become, easily fetching near $100. After seeing that, it dawned on me the official component cables are not only more expensive than the system, but they're also more expensive than an Xbox HDMI mod for the console. So in this video, let's skip the component cables and mod an Xbox with the Open Xenium mod chip and HDMI mod, compare it to component cables, and check out some awesome exclusive OG Xbox games with the help of my buddy, Dat Game Collector. Now, before I get a million comments in the comment section below, I am well aware that there are various external options available to get HDMI out. The only downside to those is they don't offer a true digital-to-digital experience, so we're going to go ahead and get the HDMI mod installed for this guy. Ripping the console open here is pretty easy, just need my Torx screwdriver bits, and yeah, we should be pretty much good to go. This specific console belongs to the legend of Zella, who makes all the intros for my channel, and it's already got some mods on it that he's done. The first one is he's got a replacement fan in there with a custom 3D printed mount, a bigger hard drive with an IDE to SATA adapter, and it's even got some really cool 3D printed feet. I'll leave a link to those 3D printed feet in the description below. But as far as prep work goes for this thing, we just need to tear this thing absolutely all the way down to the motherboard. So we're going to continue to use this Torx bit driver and take all these screws out and get us down to just the bare motherboard. Alright, with all that work done, we're going to turn our attention to this LPC debug port. Now, currently this is unpopulated, and unfortunately we're working with a version 1.6 Xbox. Now, with a 1.6 Xbox, unfortunately all the traces that are needed for the LPC debug port to be working have been removed by Microsoft. So we're going to have to rebuild that LPC port. It's not too difficult to do, but it does require a little bit of time and attention. But first thing we're going to do is get the header soldered in, and once that's soldered in, we can start rebuilding the traces necessary for the LPC debug port. Now, one thing to note is this video is not meant to be an all-inclusive tutorial, but what I would do is leave a link to a video from Mr. Mario 2011 in the description below. He has a very comprehensive video of installing an Open Xenium mod chip, and I highly recommend it. Alright, that header port's all soldered in, and it's looking really good. So now it's time to wire up those traces from their respective points and get them to the LPC debug header that we just soldered in. One thing I want to mention, you're going to see me do all this soldering here and just using wires. And a lot of the solder points on this are fairly small, but there is a LPC like rebuild, like QSB, I guess is what it's called. And basically what it is a tiny little PCB that you can put in, and it just makes kind of this process a lot easier. It's fairly inexpensive and honestly probably the path I'd go down. While you're seeing me do it with wires here and it wasn't that big of a deal for me, I think for most people using the QSB is going to make your life not only a lot easier, but save you a lot of time as well. As I mentioned, the points are pretty small, and honestly you kind of got to sit there and check it 3 or 4 times against the installation guide just to make sure you're getting it absolutely perfect the first time through. The QSB kind of eliminates the need for all of that, so honestly for the few bucks it costs, I'd highly recommend it. Though I suppose the easiest path forward is really just not to do this on a 1.6 Xbox, as you won't have to do this rebuild process that you're seeing me do right now. But anyway, I'm just going to go through real quick and take care of the rest of these points, get everything wired up, and we'll take a look at the end result here. Alright, now that that LPC has been rebuilt, we're just going to go ahead and add a jumper here to this open Xenium mod chip, which indicates that it's for a 1.6 version Xbox. Get that done here. I'm using a little bit of a leg of a capacitor. I just find it to be super easy rather than adding any wire or anything like that. It'll give it a nice clean install as well. From there, we're just going to put it on the console and we should be good to go. So as far as installing the Xbox HDMI mod goes, it's not too bad, but one of the major things that we need to do is remove this AV connector. Now in general, this is kind of more of an advanced technique, but what you're going to see me do is add some Kapton tape to keep all the other components in place, because my goal is to use my hot air rework station to heat up that AV connector and eventually just pull it out with my pair of tweezers. So that's what you're kind of seeing me do here. The trick whenever you're doing this is just to keep that hot air rework station moving so you don't heat any one area for too long. This took give or take about 3 minutes for me to pull out. Now, when doing this mod on a 1.6 Xbox, we gotta also pull off both the GPU and the CPU heatsinks, and also the plastic housing that holds it. Eventually, we're gonna need to solder in a flex cable, and the only way to be able to gain access to the solder points is to remove everything. So I'm just gonna use my flush cuts here and go ahead and pull the supporting pins out. This is actually pretty easy to do, and wasn't too bad. Something else that's pretty fortunate about this particular Xbox is it's had some TLC done to it, as the thermal paste that's on here is pretty fresh and it didn't take too much for me to be able to get those heatsinks off. If you're removing the thermal paste for the first time and the heatsinks for the first time, you're going to have to struggle with it, which is why you saw me applying that heat to it. But anyway, I'm just going to get all of this cleaned up, make it look really nice, and then it's time to solder that flex cable in. Now, whenever I'm doing these flex cables, I really like to use kind of almost like a J-type tip here. It's basically a conical tip that's like bent out a little bit at the end. With the install of this particular flex cable, I kind of did things a little bit differently, and I actually pre-tinned the ends of it, and I think that actually made a pretty big difference as I found it very easy to solder in. Now again, this is definitely not a beginner mod, so when I'm saying it's easy, it's all relative, right? But this is definitely intermediate to advanced. Having said that, for me and my personal skill set, I found that this wasn't too bad given the pre-tinning that I did ahead of time. But once I had it all kind of soldered into place, I just went back through with my multimeter, made sure that I had nice contact between all the various points and no shorts, and sure enough, you know, I had to rework 1 or 2 points and we were good to go. So it's probably worth just taking a second to talk about how this mod actually works. What we're doing is we're soldering in this flex cable, which will take the signal right off the GPU, and it'll send it to the FPGA sitting on the HDMI board. And in a minute, we're going to solder in some wires to pull audio from the SPDIF. Now, what happens is the FPGA will combine all those signals and output them in an HDMI standard. As you can kind of see here with the installation, the flex cable and those solder joints look well wetted and nice and shiny, which you always like to see. And with that all done, we've kind of accomplished the hardest part of the mod. From there, there's still more wiring that we need to do, and we need to hook up various conductors from the Xbox motherboard back to the Xbox HDMI board. These aren't too bad, and there's just a handful of them you need to do. The one thing you want to just make sure is you get them to the appropriate length as recommended by the installation diagram. And finally, after doing all that install work, it's finally time for the moment of truth, where we get to fire this thing up and see what it looks like. So the first thing I'm going to fire up is this Xbox HDMI test app. And what the test app does for the most part is runs various color bars and gradients and things like that. And what'll happen is at the end, if everything goes well, you'll get a test complete. Now I've fast forwarded through most of that, so I didn't have to make you guys sit through the entire thing. From there, I'm going to go into the advanced options and just show you what's in there. Ultimately, I'm not going to change anything, but this will allow you to do things like 4:3 widescreen, as well as make various video adjustments to the color space. And this is using a YCC color space, so it'll allow you to make adjustments from there. Again, I'm not going to touch any of this, but I figured I'd show you what's in there.
Oh no, it's gonna be one of those days.
So don't ask me why, but I kind of feel like that clip is what the Xbox might be saying after the mod was done to it. But anyway, Conquer Live and Reloaded is a great game for the OG Xbox, and it looks really good too. The gameplay is in 480p, and what really stands out to me is the way Conquer looks. Looking closely, you can clearly see the tone of his fur is much more true when looking at the HDMI version, and it looks in general less bloomed out. You can also see the text, which is more clearly defined in the HDMI version. Overall, this game is an absolute classic and one I would highly recommend. Just keep in mind this game has been censored compared to the N64 counterpart that it's a remake of, but either way, it's worth your time to check out, and if you happen to have an Xbox Series X or an Xbox One X, you can play this game in 4K.
Well, lucky I brought this as well in.
Next up is Soul Calibur 2, and I wanted to show this game off as I would argue it's one of the best looking games on the OG Xbox, and it even sports 720p visuals. Now, normally I wouldn't be showing an FMV cutscene, but I felt inclined to show this as it yielded an unexpected result, which is I actually think the analog signal looks a bit better. To me, the black levels look better in the FMV cutscene. Now, I find that a bit strange as once you get in game, that's not the case at all, and I believe the HDMI gameplay looks superior, as there's less image softness and more true colors. But, you know, I was thinking while I know enough about the OG Xbox to be dangerous, I figured I would treat you guys and bring in a real expert. And also someone who happens to have a fantastic YouTube channel as well, to talk about some awesome exclusive games for the OG Xbox that would look great on this console. So Dat Game Collector, welcome to the channel, buddy.
Thanks for having me on, Rocker. For those of you who may not be familiar with me and my channel, I regularly make content on the original Xbox and game collecting in general. The original Xbox is one of my favorite consoles and one of my most knowledgeable topics in all of gaming. I wanted to talk about a few exclusives that still look amazing to this day on the console. First up, Panzer Dragoon Orta. Not only is this game tough as nails, but it looks absolutely stunning on the original Xbox to boot. It has a largely forgettable story, but you aren't playing this for the story, you're playing it for the visuals and the gameplay. I recently beat the game for the first time, and to my surprise, you unlock a copy of the first game, which is actually the PC version running on the original Xbox. So for the cost of one game, you're actually getting two great rail shooters for one. The level that showcases the Xbox off the best is definitely the jungle level with the lush jungle and the flowing river. It looks absolutely amazing. I'd like to mention that this game is part of the Microsoft Enhancement program along with the next game we're going to talk about. Both of them can run on the Xbox One family of consoles as well as on the One X and the Series X that actually run in 4K and look absolutely fantastic. The second game is none other than a staple for the original Xbox, and that of course is Ninja Gaiden, more specifically the black version. In this version, you get all the add-on content, tighter camera controls, and just an overall more polished version, so if you plan on getting a physical copy, be sure to grab the black version. After being out of gaming for more than a decade, my boy Ryo Hayabusa is back. Ninja Gaiden looked extraordinary on the original Xbox when it came out. It took this style of game to the next level and really evolved the ninja hack and slash genre. The fluid animation between jumping up and down walls and cutting a wide variety of enemies into bloody bits, just to have to do it all again in the next room. Ninja Gaiden, at least for me, was one of those games that just really figured out pacing correctly in the action-adventure genre. It doesn't really have very many lull points in the game, and visually, this game will take you through a lot of different environments and locales with some great scenery. The last but not least game is one of my personal favorites, and that of course is MechAssault 2, one of the later first-party games to be released for the original Xbox. Now, while the environments are impressive in and of themselves, what's really impressive is the detail in the actual mechs and armored vehicles. The second MechAssault is a huge leap from the first game in virtually every way, but most importantly, visually. The game really pushed the Xbox to its utter limits. You will definitely see the Xbox struggle to run this game, which is sort of impressive if you think about it. They really packed each level with so much that it just simply has trouble keeping up. This one surprisingly has a great story to it, and maybe, just maybe, one day Phil will finally answer my prayers and release MechAssault 3 for us die-hard OG Xbox fans. I appreciate you having me on to talk about the original Xbox. Back over to you, Rocker.
Thanks for coming on and sharing some knowledge, DGC. I record all the gameplay for these and I agree with you, they are some excellent titles. OG Xbox modding has really come a long way since I modded my first Xbox all the way back in 2005, and there's still a lot more to come as the scene continues to push the system and new mods for it. So raise your hands in the comments below if you've had a modded Xbox or you currently still have one. And if you're interested in checking out some more OG Xbox content, make sure you check out DGC. I'll leave a link to his channel in the description below. Once again, thanks again to DGC for coming on the channel today, and thanks to Legend of Zella for lending me his Xbox to feature in this episode. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you check out this video here at the end, as I'm willing to bet you'll like it too.